I should have recognized the trap the moment Bruce insisted on the dress. Not the charcoal gray silk I favored, but the pale lilac monstrosity he'd bought me for an anniversary nearly a decade ago. The one with the fussy lace collar that made me look like a porcelain doll left on a shelf too long. "You need to look appropriate tonight, Bianca," he said, not looking at me. He was too busy adjusting the knot of his burgundy tie in our bedroom's floor-to-ceiling mirror. "This is the Centennial Gala for Montague Fiduciary Equities. Everyone who matters will be there." Everyone who matters. As if I hadn't been his wife for 42 years, as if I hadn't sat silently at these tables, a smiling ornament, since we were newlyweds and the company was still finding its footing. He treated me as if I were a new acquisition he needed to polish before a viewing, but I smoothed the dreadful lace, applied my neutral lipstick, and followed him to the sedan. I was, as I had always been, the dutiful wife I was trained to be. The grand ballroom of the Regency Hotel was a sea of navy suits and jewel-toned gowns, gold and black banners celebrating a century of Montague Fiduciary Equities hung from the vaulted ceiling. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over tables laden with executives, board members, and their glittering, silent spouses. Everyone looked powerful, polished, and profoundly bored. Bruce released my elbow the moment we cleared the entryway. "I need to speak with the board members," he murmured, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important than me. He disappeared into a cluster of men, leaving me alone. I made my way to the bar, a familiar ritual. I ordered a single glass of Sauvignon Blanc, nursing it as I watched the festivities from the periphery. It was my designated spot, the place where I was visible but not required to participate. That's when I heard it. The braying laughter, sharp and ugly, cutting through the orchestral music. "Just look at her," a voice sneered, loud enough for half the room to hear, standing there like a lost puppy. I didn't need to turn to know it was Damian Harding, Bruce's vice president of operations. He was a man half Bruce's age, with slicked back hair and a cruel reptilian smirk he never bothered to hide. "Seriously, how does it feel to be such a professional failure, Bianca?" he called out. He was performing for the junior executives circling him. "Your husband builds an empire and you just spend the profits. Must be nice." Around him, 3 other men chuckled. Martin Tate, the head of accounting, chimed in. "That's rough, Damien. But really, what does she do all day? Shop at the Galleria? Get her nails done?" My face burned, a hot, prickling humiliation. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, my spine straight. Decades of practice had taught me how to swallow poison with a polite smile. The laughter grew louder. Other guests were turning to stare. I felt their eyes on me, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. A few of the other wives, women I'd known for decades, looked away uncomfortably. They didn't want my failure to be contagious. But the worst was yet to come, the final, deepest cut. Bruce, my husband of 4 decades, the man I had built this world for, walked over to the group. He'd heard every word. Instead of defending me, he threw back his head and laughed. It was the loudest, most genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. "Boys, boys, you're too kind," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "You have to admit she's excellent at spending. That takes some real skill, doesn't it?" He looked directly at me. His eyes weren't apologetic. They were cold, amused, and filled with a casual contempt that struck me like a physical blow. "That's how things should be," he announced to his audience. "It's the natural and proper division of labor. I work, she spends. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you." The circle of vultures closed in, sensing Bruce's approval as permission to feast. The words, which had been cruel whispers, now became bold proclamations. "She's a perfect corporate wife, though," Damian Harding said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Silent and decorative. Just how you trained her, Bruce." "Exactly," Martin Tate agreed, his eyes gleaming. I bet she doesn't even know what Montague Fiduciary Equities actually does. Probably thinks we sell, I don't know, expensive dresses like that one. More laughter, more stares. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt small, exposed, and utterly foolish in my lilac lace. I stood frozen, the wine glass trembling in my hand. Each comment was a fresh insult, a new layer of degradation piled on top of 42 years of being dismissed. Bruce just stood there, beaming, the proud ringmaster of my public disgrace. But then something inside me didn't just break, it calcified. The quiet, simmering rage that had been my companion for decades, a rage I'd suppressed with gardening, charity work, and feigned ignorance, finally cooled into something hard and sharp. The humiliation didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by a sudden, breathtaking clarity. I set my wine glass down on a passing server's tray. The trembling in my hand stopped. I walked toward the group. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a sharp, steady rhythm that cut through their laughter. The conversations around us began to fade as people sensed the shift in the room. The performance was about to change. "Bruce," I said. My voice was sweet, light, and carried across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Darling, could you come with me for a moment?" He looked surprised, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at being interrupted. But he was still the proud husband and I was still the dutiful wife. He allowed me to take his arm, a proprietary gesture. "What is it, Bianca?" he whispered, his smile tightening. "Don't make a scene." "Oh, I won't," I murmured. "I just think everyone deserves a little honesty tonight." I didn't guide him back to the shadows. I led him directly to the small stage at the front of the ballroom, where the orchestra had just finished a set. The executives followed, still grinning, anticipating the next chapter of my embarrassment. "Excuse me," I said to the orchestra leader, who was shuffling his sheet music. "May I borrow this?" I didn't wait for an answer. I took the microphone from its stand. The slight feedback screech caused the entire room to fall silent. Every eye was on me, on Bruce, on the executives trailing behind us like a pack of hyenas. Bruce's face was a mask of confusion and growing anger. "Bianca, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he hissed, grabbing for my elbow. I stepped away from him, moving to the center of the stage. The spotlight, meant for the singer, found me instead, illuminating the pale, ridiculous lilac of my dress. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was steady. Amplified, it filled every corner of the ballroom. "What a wonderful celebration for our centennial." I smiled, a bright, brittle expression I had perfected over the years. "Since we're all being so honest and open tonight, I have something I'd like to share." I saw Damian Harding nudge Martin Tate, both of them barely suppressing their laughter. They thought I was drunk. They thought I was about to make a fool of myself. "My husband's colleagues were just sharing some of their thoughts with me," I continued, my gaze sweeping over them. "Damian, you asked how it feels to be a failure." I pointed at him. He stopped smiling. "And Martin," I said, turning to the accountant. "You wondered what I do all day, besides shop and get my nails done." I turned finally to my husband. "And Bruce, my dear Bruce, you believe my only skill is spending your money, that it's the natural order of things." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Board members shifted uncomfortably. This was not on the program. Bruce's face was turning a dull, mottled red. "Bianca, stop this, right now." "I'm just getting to the good part, darling," I said. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute, terrified silence of the room. "Well," I said, letting my smile widen, "let me ask you all a question in return." My eyes locked onto Damian, then Martin, then Bruce. "How does it feel?" I asked, my voice ringing with clarity, "to know that the useless, decorative, professional failure you've all been laughing at owns 73% of Montague Fiduciary Equities?" The silence that followed was not just silence, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air from the room, the color from their faces, the music from the air. Damien Harding's mouth fell open in a perfect, stupid O. Martin Tate went so white I thought he might faint. The other executives just stared, their grins frozen and grotesque. And Bruce looked at me as if I had just sprouted a second head and begun speaking in tongues. "That's impossible," he whispered, the words barely audible. He lunged for the microphone, but I held it firmly. "Is it?" I asked the room. I reached into my small, useless evening bag and pulled out a single folded document. A document I had carried with me to every one of these events for the last 20 years, just waiting. "This," I said, "is the most recent summary of the majority shareholding, filed with the SEC. It's all perfectly legal and up to date." The color drained from Bruce's face. He looked at the paper in my hand as if it were a snake. Around us, the crowd erupted. Board members who had treated me like furniture for decades were suddenly on their feet, craning their necks, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "You see," I said, my voice growing stronger with every word, "while you've all been assuming I was nothing more than a decoration, I've been the one holding the purse strings. Every major strategic move, every acquisition, every financial approval, it all comes through me. It always has." Bruce reached for the paper with a shaking hand. This can't be real." "Oh, but it is," I replied, pulling it back. "And now that we've finally cleared that up, I think we need to have a very different conversation. A conversation about who exactly has been failing whom." I dropped the microphone. The thud echoed through the ballroom. I walked off the stage, past my stunned, silent husband, and straight out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos to erupt in my wake. The ride home was a suffocating 10-mile silence. The only sounds were the purr of the sedan's engine and the ragged, furious sound of Bruce's breathing. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, glowing in the dim light of the dashboard. His jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. I hadn't seen him this angry since our early days of marriage, back when he still bothered to show any emotion other than patronizing indifference. I sat perfectly still, staring out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past. I felt nothing. Not fear, not regret, just a cold, clean emptiness. The storm had broken, and I was in the eye. He didn't speak as we pulled into our long, winding driveway. He didn't speak as he slammed the car into park. He stalked into the house ahead of me and waited in the grand marble foyer, his hands clenched at his sides. 42 years of habit made me automatically hang up my coat and set my evening bag on the hall table. I slipped off my heels. Then, and only then, did I walk into the living room. "Explain," he said. The word was low, controlled, but I could hear the raw panic vibrating beneath it. "There's nothing to explain, Bruce," I replied. I walked to the bar cart, my hand steady as I poured a generous measure of brandy into a snifter. Everything I said was true. He followed me, his movements jerky, agitated. He ripped at his tie, pulling it loose. "That's impossible. I would have known. The board, the lawyers, they would have told me." "The board reports to me," I interrupted quietly. "They always have." He stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "Bianca, this is insane. You don't know the first thing about business. You can't even balance a checkbook. You've never looked at a financial statement in your life." I almost laughed at that. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. Instead, I took a small sip of brandy. The liquid fire felt good. "Sit down, Bruce," I said, gesturing to the heavy leather armchair he favored. "It's time you learned some family history." He remained standing, vibrating with a rage that was rapidly turning to fear. "What family history? Your parents they were middle-class nobodies. My grandfather built this company from nothing." "Your grandfather," I said, taking a seat in my own chair by the window. was a month away from losing everything when I met you." Bruce's face went pale. "That's a lie. He was a brilliant businessman. He left me a thriving company." "He left you a beautiful facade," I said, swirling the brandy, "a facade that was hiding a rotting foundation. When we got engaged in 1982, Montague Fiduciary Equities was hemorrhaging money. The mills they'd built the company on were outdated, the equipment was falling apart, and the bank was 3 months from foreclosure." "No," he whispered. "That's not true." "It is," I said. "The company was carrying over $2 million in debt. 400 people were about to lose their jobs. Your grandfather was having stress-induced chest pains, and your father had already started drinking himself into an early grave over the shame of it all." Bruce finally sank onto the couch across from me, his legs giving out. How could you possibly know any of this?" "Because," I said, taking another sip, "my middle-class nobody parents weren't quite as humble as I let you believe." I let the silence stretch, watching him process. His world, the one built on the myth of his own superiority, was fracturing. "You always spoke of your father as a regional manager for a steel company," he said, his voice faint. "He was," I replied. "He was the regional manager, the president, and the sole owner of Preston Industries. Primarily steel manufacturing, yes, but he also had significant investments in textiles, automotive parts, and commercial real estate." I met his blank, uncomprehending stare. "When he died, 6 months before our wedding, he left me everything, his entire portfolio." Bruce's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. $12 million, I continued, the number hanging in the air between us. "Not a staggering fortune by today's standards, perhaps, but in 1982, for a 24-year-old woman, it was substantial, especially for a woman everyone, including you, assumed was marrying above her station." "12 million, he repeated, as if the words were foreign. "I could have walked away," I said, leaning forward. 3 weeks before our wedding, my father's lawyers presented me with their due diligence on your family, on Montague Fiduciary Equities. They showed me the debt, the foreclosure notices, the cooked books. They begged me to call it off. I could have found a nice banker or a lawyer, someone who could have supported me in the style I was actually accustomed to, but I didn't. I locked his gaze. I was in love. Or I thought I was, and you were so proud, so I made a decision. I decided to save your family's legacy." "Save it?" he whispered. "How?" "Quietly," I said, "anonymously. 3 weeks before our wedding, I had my father's lawyers create a series of shell companies, holding companies, investment vehicles, Preston Holdings, Preston Investments, the Preston Family Trust, all registered under my maiden name. Over the course of our first 5 years of marriage, I systematically and anonymously bought out all of Montague Fiduciary Equities' debt. I modernized the equipment. I restructured the entire operation from the shadows. I pumped millions of my own money into your thriving business to keep it from collapsing. I stood up and walked to the ornate bookshelf where Bruce kept his collection of golf trophies and Man of the Year awards. Behind a row of leather-bound books he'd never opened, I pressed a hidden latch. A small panel clicked open, revealing a safe. He watched, dumbfounded, as I spun the dial. "The fascinating thing about shell companies," I said, pulling out a thick, leather-bound portfolio, "is how useful they are for maintaining privacy, especially when you want to help a man without damaging his fragile pride." I tossed the portfolio onto the coffee table in front of him. "These are the original incorporation papers. The bank loan you thought your grandfather secured to save the company? That was my money, funneled through Preston Investments, the new investors who suddenly appeared, interested in textiles? My shell companies. What you have believed for 40 years was your grandfather's brilliant financial recovery was me." His hand shook as he opened the folder. He stared at my maiden name, Bianca Preston, signed on dozens of documents. "All these years," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All these years. You thought you were a brilliant businessman," I finished for him. "You thought you'd inherited your grandfather's acumen. You thought you were the one providing for the grateful little wife you'd rescued from humble circumstances." I returned to my chair and watched his world finish crumbling. "But how?" he stammered, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "I never saw you. You were always here." I agreed. I was always here. "Where did you think I was when you were on your endless business trips and golf weekends?" "The home office upstairs," I said. "The one you call my sewing room and haven't entered in 20 years. That's my actual office. It's where I run Montague Fiduciary Equities. The book club I attend every Tuesday afternoon. That's my weekly board meeting, held via secure video conference with the directors who actually run this company, directors who report to me. The spa days I take on the first Friday of every month. Those are my quarterly financial planning sessions with our accountants and lawyers. My lawyers." His gaze drifted around the room, landing on details he'd never truly seen. The second private phone line I'd had installed for personal calls. The heavy-duty, fireproof filing cabinet in my sewing room that I'd claimed held recipes and household records. The high-end encrypted laptop I'd told him was for email and online shopping. "Every lie," he whispered, his face ashen. Our entire marriage has been built on lies." "Not lies, Bruce," I corrected him, my voice cold. "Protection. I protected your pride. I protected your reputation. I protected your family's name. I ensured you could hold your head high at every business function, every golf tournament, every empty social gathering. I made sure Montague Fiduciary Equities not only survived, but thrived." I finished my brandy and set the glass down with a soft, definitive clink. "What I didn't protect," I said, my voice hardening, "was myself. I didn't protect myself from the humiliation, the condescension, and the casual public cruelty you and your sycophants have been showing me for decades." Bruce buried his face in his hands. A dry, racking sob escaped him. "Bianca, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "If I had known..." "If you had known what?" I snapped. "You would have treated me with respect? You would have acknowledged my contributions? You would have defended me when your friends attacked me tonight?" I shook my head. "No, Bruce. You would have found other ways to diminish me. The problem was never that you didn't know about my capabilities. The problem was that you never, in 42 years, bothered to look for them. You saw what you wanted to see, a decorative, useless woman." We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock I had bought at an auction in 1987. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and terrified. What happens now?" I allowed myself a small smile. It held no warmth. "Now, Bruce," I said, "you're going to learn what it really means to work for Montague Fiduciary Equities. Because as of tonight, the pretense is over. The charade is done." The next morning, Bruce left for work before dawn. There was no goodbye kiss, not that there had been for years. The slam of the garage door was his only acknowledgement. I waited until I heard his car disappear down our tree-lined street before I made my way, coffee in hand, to my sewing room. The space on the second floor was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude. While Bruce thought I spent my time up here scrapbooking, I was running a $50 million enterprise from behind an antique French sewing table that doubled as my desk. I unlocked the fireproof filing cabinet he'd never questioned and pulled out a thick folder labeled Personnel Executive Level. It was time to take a much closer look at the men who had been so eager to humiliate me. I started with Damien Harding, the reptilian VP who had started the mockery. What I found in his file made my stomach turn. It wasn't just the expected performance reviews, which were mediocre at best, or the salary information, which was inflated. It was the expense reports. Dinner charges at five-star restaurants on nights he claimed to be in client meetings, often for two people. Hotel bills for business trips on weekends with no corresponding conference or customer visit records. And, most telling, a pattern of Friday afternoon emergency meetings across town that required him to leave the office at 2 p.m. I cross-referenced his expense reports with the company credit card statements I reviewed monthly. The pattern became clear in less than 10 minutes. Damien had been using company funds to finance an affair, submitting fraudulent expense reports for what were obviously personal, romantic getaways. He wasn't just cruel, he was a common thief. Next, I opened the file for Martin Tate, the accountant who had joked about me getting my nails done. I expected to find something similar, skimming, perhaps, petty fraud. Instead, I found nothing. His files were immaculate. His expense reports were modest and perfectly documented. His performance reviews were glowing. His record was spotless. I stared at the file, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This was worse. Damien was a sloppy, arrogant fool. Martin Tate was smart. He was the head of accounting. He would have to know about Damien's fraud. He would have to be the one approving those ridiculous expenses. He wasn't just a bystander laughing at a joke. He was complicit. He was the gatekeeper, the one who cooked the books to cover for his friends. And his own file was a fortress, meticulously curated to show nothing but model employee behavior. He was more dangerous than Damien. He was covering his tracks, which meant he knew exactly what he was doing. I set his file aside. He would require a different approach. Whis. I pushed Martin's file away and turned my attention to the real rot. I didn't need a file. I just needed to follow the money. I pulled up the executive payroll and benefits ledger on my encrypted laptop. I already knew what I was looking for. I had suspected it for years, but had lacked the will or the rage to confirm it. Sandra Chen, Bruce's executive assistant for the past 15 years. I typed her name into the personnel database. Her salary history alone was damning. She'd started at $32,000. She was now making $95,000 a year, plus bonuses, an increase that far outpaced any other administrative employee in the company. I started cross-referencing her travel schedule with Bruce's. For 15 years, they matched perfectly. Same cities, same hotels, often on the same dates. He'd been taking her on every business trip, billing the company for her flight, her room, her meals. My hands trembled, not with jealousy, but with a cold fury. I'd long since stopped caring who Bruce shared his bed with. Our marriage had been a business arrangement for decades, but this was theft. He wasn't just having an affair, he was embezzling my money to finance it. He was putting Montague fiduciary equities at legal risk for his personal, sordid indulgences, all while treating me like an idiot. And then I found it. The document that sealed his fate. Hidden deep in Selena's employment file uploaded 6 months ago was a memo from Bruce to Human Resources. It was a formal request to create a new position, Director of Executive Operations. The salary he had proposed was $120,000 annually, plus profit sharing and a high-level executive benefits package. The justification paragraph made my blood run cold. Ms. Chung has demonstrated an exceptional and personal dedication to the executive team. Her intimate knowledge of company operations and her unwavering personal commitment to excellence make her invaluable to this company. I strongly recommend immediate approval of this promotion and compensation package. Intimate knowledge, personal commitment. The language was a deliberate, mocking wink, but the most infuriating part, the part that made me want to destroy him, was the signature line at the bottom of the authorization form. He had forged my signature. He had clumsily scrawled Bianca Montague on the line, required for majority shareholder approval of any new executive position. He had assumed, with such breathtaking arrogance, that I would never see it, that the decorative wife in the sewing room would never look. I printed the memo. The single sheet of paper felt heavy in my hand. It was forgery. It was fraud. It was the end of his career. My phone rang, a sharp, jarring sound in the quiet room. The caller ID showed Bruce's office number. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Yes? Bianca? His voice was strained, laced with a false, hearty warmth that set my teeth on edge. Bianca, darling, I've been thinking. Have you? I replied, my voice flat. Yes, about last night. About everything you told me. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, trying to gauge my mood. Look, maybe this is a good thing, a chance to reset. I waited. You've clearly been more involved in the business than I realized, he continued, the condescension still there, just wrapped in a different package. And I respect that. I do. So maybe it's time for you to take a more official role. An official role, I repeated, staring at the forged signature on my desk. Exactly. We could announce you as a consultant or a senior advisor. We'll get you an office, a title, print you some business cards. You know, make it legitimate. I almost laughed. It was so pitiful. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was about recognition. He thought he could appease me by offering me a C title in the company I owned and had been running for 40 years. He thought he was the king, graciously offering a courtier a small favor. He had no idea I was the one who owned the castle, the throne, and the crown. That's very generous of you, Bruce, I said, my voice dangerously sweet. A real office. Business cards. My goodness. Yes, I think it would be perfect, he said, relief flooding his voice. He thought he'd solved the problem. Tell me, I continued, have you discussed this generous arrangement with Selena? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was a strangled whisper. I don't know what you mean. Selena Chung, I said, my voice dropping its sweet pretense, replaced by ice. Your executive assistant. The woman you've been having an affair with for 15 years. The woman you've been promoting and giving illegal raises to. The woman you just tried to make a director by forging my signature on an authorization form. I heard him gasp, a sharp intake of breath. How did I know? I finished for him. Bruce, I review every expense report, every personnel file, every financial transaction this company makes. Did you really think you could hide an affair you've been financing with corporate funds? Bianca, listen, it's not what you think, he stammered, panic making his voice high-pitched. It's exactly what I think, I snapped. You've been embezzling, you've been committing fraud, and you've been doing it all while publicly humiliating me. I can fix this, he yelped. I'll talk to her. I'll end it. Just stay there. Don't do anything. I can fix this. He hung up. I stared at the phone. He didn't deny it. He just panicked. I knew what he was doing. He was running to Selena, not to end it, but to coordinate their stories, to destroy the evidence. A cold dread hit me. I turned back to my laptop. The single printed memo was good, but the entire 15-year history, the travel logs, the expense reports, the bonuses, was better. I needed the full package. I opened the secure server portal to the personnel directory. I navigated to Selena Chung's file. I clicked. Access denied. This file is not available. I tried again. Access denied. I tried to access the executive expense ledgers for the past 5 years. Access denied. A system alert popped up in the corner of my screen. High-level administrative purge initiated by S. Chung. 450 files deleted. Server cache wiping in progress. Selena. Bruce must have called her, told her I knew. While he was stammering on the phone, she was already at work, wiping the servers, deleting her travel records, her salary history, Damien's fraudulent expenses, her own. Everything. I gripped the edge of my desk. They were trying to erase it all. In an hour, the digital trail would be gone. I was furious. I was left with just one piece of paper, the forged memo. It was powerful, but it wasn't the mountain of evidence I had just spent an hour compiling. They had taken my advantage. They had destroyed my evidence. I felt a moment of pure, unadulterated panic. Bruce and Selena would deny everything. It would be my word and one disputed document against theirs. I stared at the access denied message, my heart pounding. They were fast. Selena was smart. She knew exactly what to purge. All my careful documentation, gone in minutes. My lost advantage. I was left with the forged memo and my 73% ownership. The ownership was the atom bomb, but I had wanted to win with the surgical strike of their own corruption. Now they had taken that from me. I stood up, pacing the small room. I had to proceed based on power alone. It was messier, less elegant. Just as I was about to call Bruce and order him to my house, a notification chimed on my laptop. It was an email. It wasn't from my usual encrypted business account. It was from a generic, internal-only address. actinternalamphequities.com, an anonymous, unmonitored Dropbox. The subject line was 2 words, pest control. My hands hesitated over the trackpad. This could be a trap. It could be a virus from Selena, a final insult, but my gut told me otherwise. I opened the email. There was no text, just a single attachment. Shell Ledger T Act. I downloaded the file and opened it. It wasn't a company ledger. It was the private off-book ledger for a shell account I didn't recognize, a holding company named Bayside Ventures. It was a meticulous record of payments, rent for a luxury high-rise apartment in the city, a car lease for a late-model Mercedes, jewelry, cash transfers, all flowing from Bayside Ventures to one recipient, S. Chung. And at the bottom of the ledger, a single scanned image, the signature card that had opened the Bayside Ventures account. The signature was Bruce's. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just company embezzlement. This was a separate hidden slush fund. This was wire fraud. This was a criminal enterprise. I knew with absolute certainty who had sent it. Martin Tate, the immaculate accountant, the man whose files were too clean. He had been covering his tracks. He knew where all the bodies were buried because he was the one who buried them. And now, sensing the shift in power, sensing that Bruce was going down, he had just handed me the shovel. He wasn't an ally. He was a rat, jumping from a sinking ship and trying to curry favor with the new captain. I now had the forged memo, and I had the slush fund ledger. The pincer movement was complete. I picked up my private line, the one Bruce didn't know about, and dialed his office direct. Selena wouldn't be there. She'd be at her own desk, frantically monitoring the server purge. Bruce answered on the first ring, his voice breathless. "Bianca, did you get my message? I'm handling it." "Stop talking, Bruce," I said. My voice was calm, arctic. "What? I told you I have the Bayside Ventures ledger," I said. The silence this time was different. It wasn't shock. It was the silence of death. I also have the forged promotion memo for Selena, the one with my signature on it. A small strangled sound came through the phone. "Your little server purge was sloppy, Bruce. You missed a few things." "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want you to go to Selena's desk. You will tell her to stop what she is doing. You will then escort her to your car, and you will both come home. Now." "Here? To the house?" "Bianca, This is not a negotiation, Bruce. You have 30 minutes before I forward this ledger and that memo to the district attorney. I will be waiting in the living room." Bring her." I hung up the phone before he could respond. I printed the ledger, the pages warm from the printer. I placed the single forged memo on top of it. Then I went downstairs to the living room to wait. They arrived in 27 minutes. I watched from the living room window as they sat in Bruce's sedan for a long time, the car idling in the driveway. I could see their silhouettes, their heads close together, engaged in a frantic, hushed discussion. Finally, the car doors opened. Bruce looked like a man walking to his own execution. Selena Chung, the woman who had organized my dinner parties and sent my Christmas cards, looked terrified. She was clutching her purse, her eyes darting around as if she expected police to emerge from the rose bushes. I met them in the living room. I hadn't turned on many lights. The room was cast in shadow. I had arranged 3 chairs in a triangle. No one would be sitting together on the couch. This was not a social call. This was a deposition. "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the 2 chairs I'd placed facing mine. I took the highest back chair for myself, positioning it so I would be looking down on them. Selena perched on the absolute edge of her seat, ready to bolt. Bruce slumped into his gaze fixed on the antique rug. "Before we begin," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room, "I want to make something clear. This is not a personal conversation about a marriage. This is a business meeting about employee misconduct, embezzlement, and felony fraud." I placed the small stack of papers on the coffee table where they could both see it. Selena's eyes widened. "Selena," I began, "this is your employment contract signed 15 years ago. Your starting salary was $32,000. Can you tell me what your current salary is?" She swallowed, her voice a reedy whisper. $95,000. $95,000, I repeated. "That's an impressive increase. Tell me, what additional responsibilities have you taken on to justify that?" She looked desperately at Bruce. He refused to meet her gaze. I've taken on more executive support duties," she stammered, "managing Bruce's calendar, handling confidential correspondence. And this?" I slid the forged memo to the top of the pile. "Was Director of Executive Operations one of those new duties? The $120,000 a year position Bruce created for you 6 months ago? The one he approved by forging my name?" Selena went white. "And this," I said, sliding the Bayside Ventures ledger on top of the memo, "this apartment, this Mercedes, were these also part of your compensation package?" Selena broke. A high, thin wail escaped her. "He told me you knew," she cried, turning on Bruce. "He told me you had an arrangement, a modern marriage. He said you didn't care." I felt a cold smile touch my lips. "An arrangement? Is that what he called it?" "Yes," she sobbed. "He said you were happy with your social life and weren't interested in his personal life, as long as he was discreet. He said you approved of all of it." I turned my cold gaze to my husband. "Is that what you told her, Bruce? That I approved of you embezzling company funds to finance your affair?" "Bianca, I can explain," he protested weakly. "No," I said, "you can't. You lied to her just as much as you lied to me. You used her and you used my money to do it." I turned back to Selena. "Did he ever mention in 15 years that I own 73% of this company? That every dollar, every bonus, every fraudulent expense came directly from my pocket?" Selena's eyes widened in dawning horror. "Own? I thought his family's company was bankrupt," I snapped. "I bought it. You've been his mistress on my dime." The realization hit her. She wasn't the mistress of a powerful CEO. She was the mistress of a kept man, a fraud. "So here is what is going to happen," I said, my voice crisp and businesslike. "Selena, you have 2 choices. Option 1, I file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. You will be arrested today. You will be prosecuted, and you will go to prison. You will also be personally liable for repaying every penny. Given this ledger," I tapped the paper, "that's well into 6 figures." She made a small, choking sound. Option 2, you resign, effective immediately. You will forfeit all severance pay and benefits. You will sign this comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and you will agree to a structured repayment plan for the $87,000 in fraudulent expenses I found before you wiped the server. I can't pay that, she whispered. The unauthorized salary increases are my loss to absorb, I said. The $87,000 in stolen cash for hotels, flights, and gifts is not. You will pay it back. In exchange, I will not pursue criminal charges against you. I pulled a pre-prepared resignation letter and the NDA from my portfolio and slid them across the table. You have 5 minutes to decide. If you choose option 2, sign these. Leave your office keys, your key cards, and your company credit card on this table, and get out of my house. She looked at Bruce, one last time, a desperate, pleading look. He just stared at the floor. He had already abandoned her. With a shaking hand, she grabbed the pen from the table. She signed the documents, her signature a jagged scrawl. She opened her purse, her hands trembling so badly she could barely unlatch it. She threw her keys and her corporate card on the table. They clattered loudly in the silence. This meeting is over for you, I said. She stood up, gathered what was left of her dignity, and walked out of the living room, out of the front door, and out of my life. Once I heard the door click shut, I turned my full attention to Bruce. He was visibly shaking. Now then, I said, let's discuss your future with Montague Fiduciary Equities. Bula, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please. You are no longer the president, I stated. You are no longer an executive. As of today, you are a mid-level employee with no authority to hire, fire, promote, or approve a single dollar of expenses. You can't be serious. I am completely serious. You have 2 choices, just like she did. You can continue working for my company in a reduced capacity, under appropriate supervision, or you can resign. If you resign, I will have you charged with felony, forgery, and wire fraud. His face went red. This is ridiculous. I built this company. I made it successful. You almost destroyed this company, I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. I built it back up while you took credit for my work and posed for magazines. For 42 years, I have been protecting your reputation. That protection ends now. The next morning, I arrived at the offices of Montague Fiduciary Equities at 7:30 a.m. I had not slept. I had visited this building perhaps a dozen times in 4 decades, always for Christmas parties or retirement dinners, always on Bruce's arm. Today, I walked through the marble lobby as its owner. The security guard, Robert, did a double take. Good morning, Mrs. Montague. You're in early today. Good morning, Robert, I said, not breaking my stride. I'll be working here regularly from now on. Please have a key card prepared for me with full building-wide access, master level. His confusion was obvious, but he nodded. Of course, ma'am. Should I let Mr. Montague know you've arrived? Mr. Montague is no longer in the executive suite, I said, walking toward the private elevator that required a key. He'll be working in the Southwest Division. You'll get a memo on it later. I took the elevator to the top floor. Bruce's corner office. My corner office. A cleaning crew I'd hired overnight had already been there. His golf trophies, his Man of the Year plaques, his pretentious Scotch collection, and his photos were all packed in cardboard boxes by the door, marked personal effects. My new laptop was on the massive mahogany desk. My new assistant, Margaret, a woman in her 60s with a resume that screamed competence and discretion, was already at the outer desk. Good morning, Mrs. Montague, she said, not batting an eye. Good morning, Margaret. Are the department heads assembled? Yes, ma'am. In the main conference room, as requested. Good, I said. Please call them to order. I'll be in momentarily. I walked into my office and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city. My company. The silence was perfect. It was time. The conference room fell silent when I entered. 12 department heads. 10 of them were men, all of them Bruce's hand-picked allies. All of them had been at the gala. All of them had watched me be humiliated. I took my seat at the head of the table, the chair that had always, by default, been Bruce's. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice crisp. "As you may have heard, there have been some immediate organizational changes. As of last night, I am serving as CEO and President of Montague Fiduciary Equities." Damian Harding, the VP of Operations, leaned forward aggressively, a smirk already on his face. "With all due respect, Mrs. Montague, where is Bruce? Shouldn't he be the one making this announcement?" I smiled coldly. "Mr. Montague has been reassigned to a position more suited to his actual qualifications. We'll get to that. Now," I continued, "speaking of reassignments, Mr. Harding, you're terminated." "Effective immediately." The smirk vanished. "What? You can't be serious. You can't fire me. I have an ironclad contract." "You had a contract," I corrected him. "You violated it when you submitted fraudulent expense reports totaling over $37,000 in the last 3 years alone, not to mention the affair you've been funding on the company dime." His face went from white to a deep, blotchy red. That's slander. You have no proof." "Oh, but I do. Margaret," I called. My assistant entered and handed Damian a thick folder. "That contains copies of every fraudulent receipt, every hotel bill, and every restaurant charge you filed for your client meetings. Security will escort you out after this meeting. My lawyers will be in touch regarding repayment." He sputtered, speechless. "If you fight this," I added quietly, "my next call is to the district attorney. I'm sure they'd be very interested in your creative accounting. It's your choice." He snapped his mouth shut. I turned my gaze down the table. Mr. Torres. Martin Tate, the accountant, visibly flinched. He had been staring at his notepad, but now his head snapped up. The room was deathly quiet. They all expected him to be fired next. "Mr. Torres," I repeated, "your records are immaculate, truly impressive." He swallowed. "Thank you, Mrs. Montague. I pride myself on my attention to detail." "I'm sure you do," I said. "You were also, I assume, the one who approved Mr. Harding's expense reports, and I suspect the one who set up the Bayside Ventures account for Mr. Montague." His face went ashen. He knew he was caught. "The ledger you sent me last night was very helpful," I said, my voice low enough that only he and the people next to him could hear. "It was a timely contribution." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of terror and confusion. "Tell me, Martin," I asked, "why did you send it?" Martin looked at Damian, who was sweating in his chair. He looked at the other executives who were avoiding his gaze. He looked back at me. "He was an arrogant fool," Martin whispered, nodding at Damian. And Bruce. They were running it into the ground. They were sloppy. They treated this place like their personal piggy bank. I keep the books. I hated what they were doing. "But you helped them," I stated. "I was trapped," he said, his voice pleading. "I have a mortgage, kids in college. If I reported it, Bruce would have fired me and blackballed me. If I didn't, I was complicit." "You were complicit," I said, "and there are consequences for that." He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the axe to fall. "You're demoted," I announced. "Effective immediately, you are no longer the VP of Finance. You are a senior financial analyst. Your knowledge of the company's books is, as you said, detailed. You will now use that knowledge to assist the new VP of Finance in a full, top-to-bottom audit of every executive spending for the last 10 years. He opened his eyes, stunned. You're not firing me?" "No, I'm putting you to work. You will report to Melinda Sharp. Your new salary will reflect your new non-executive position. Do you accept these terms?" He nodded, a look of profound, dazed relief on his face. "Yes, Yes, Mrs. Montague. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. Get to work. I turned to the rest of the silent, terrified room. Now, for the new leadership structure. This company has been operating as a boys' club for far too long. That ends today. I looked at a woman at the far end of the table. She was in her late 20s with sharp, intelligent eyes. Jessica Wallace. Jessica sat up, her eyes wide. Yes, Mrs. Montague. You're being promoted to Senior Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. You'll be taking Mr. Harding's former position. A small gasp escaped her. Jessica was brilliant. She had consistently outperformed every other manager, yet Bruce had passed her over for promotion 3 times in favor of less qualified men. Melinda Sharp, I said, looking at a sharp woman from accounting who Martin Tate had kept buried in a junior role. You are the new VP of Finance. You'll be supervising Mr. Torres on the audit. And Clarissa Rivers, I said to another woman. You will be heading our new Strategic Development Department. Your proposal, which Bruce rejected last quarter, was excellent. I'm green-lighting it. Your budget is approved. The 3 women stared at me, their shock slowly turning into determination. The men just looked ill. Now then, I said, closing my folder, that brings us to Mr. Montague's new position. The room held its breath. As I mentioned, Mr. Montague has been reassigned. He will be taking on the new role of Regional Sales Coordinator for the Southwest Territory. A few people choked back coughs. It was a junior sales role, a demotion of catastrophic proportions. His new starting salary will be $65,000 annually, with standard employee benefits, and of course, a company car appropriate to his new position, a Ford, I believe. I looked directly at the new SVP of Operations. Jessica, he will be reporting directly to you. I expect you to hold him to the same performance standards as any other member of your team. Jessica Wallace, 28 years old, looked at me. A small, sharp, confident smile touched her lips. I understand completely, Mrs. Montague. I will manage him. Excellent, I said, standing up. Margaret will distribute the new organizational charts this afternoon. Mr. Harding, security is waiting for you outside. The rest of you, welcome to the new Montague Fiduciary Equities. Let's get to work. I was back in my office reviewing the audit parameters with Melinda Sharp when my door was thrown open. It slammed against the wall with a crack. Bruce stood in the doorway, his face purple with rage. Melinda Sharp quickly and quietly excused herself. "This is insane, Bianca," he roared, storming into the room. "You can't do this. You can't treat me like some junior employee." I didn't look up from the report I was reading. "Close the door, Bruce. You're disrupting the workplace." "I will not close the door. I built this company." "You nearly destroyed this company," I replied, finally lifting my eyes. They were ice cold. "And if you continue to have an emotional outburst, I will have security escort you out of the building, permanently." "Jessica Wallace?" he spat. "She's young enough to be my daughter. You expect me to take orders from her?" "I expect you to do your job," I said. "Jessica has a master's degree in business administration and has consistently exceeded her performance targets for 5 years. She is eminently qualified to supervise regional sales. You, on the other hand, are eminently qualified to go to prison for fraud. Which would you prefer?" He slammed his trembling hands on my desk. "What about loyalty? What about respect? What about 42 years of marriage?" I finally stood up, walking around the desk to face him. I was calm. He was trembling. "Respect?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want to talk about respect? You stood in front of our colleagues and laughed while they called me a useless failure. You forged my signature on legal documents. You embezzled my money to finance a 15-year affair." I leaned in closer. "Tell me, Bruce, which part of that behavior demonstrated respect for me?" His face contorted, struggling for a response. He had none. I made mistakes," he stammered. "But this is humiliating." "Yes," I agreed, a small cold smile on my lips. "It is. Now you know exactly how I felt for 42 years. He stared at me for a long moment, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization. He had lost. He had lost everything. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and stalked out of my office. He didn't slam the door on his way out. Bruce didn't return to the office. He didn't report to Jessica Wallace. He didn't even go to the Southwest Division. He just disappeared. On Friday afternoon, Margaret brought me a letter from his lawyer. He was quitting, citing irreconcilable differences with new management. He was also filing for divorce, claiming I had fundamentally misrepresented myself during our marriage. I read the letter twice. Then I filed it in my desk drawer under P for pending. After 42 years, his departure, his final dramatic exit, should have felt like a devastating loss. It should have torn a hole in my life. Instead, all I felt was relief, a profound, cleansing, giddy relief. The 50-pound weight I had been carrying around my neck for my entire adult life had just walked away. That evening, I called my real lawyer, the one who had managed the Preston Family Trust for 30 years. "He's filed," I said. "We're ready, Bianca," my lawyer replied. "He's about to discover that the prenuptial agreement he insisted on to protect his family's assets is the very document that will leave him with nothing." Bruce would try to claim half of everything. He would discover in a very public and humiliating way that he had nothing to claim. The house, the cars, the vacation properties, the art, the stock portfolio, all of it had been purchased with Preston money and was titled exclusively in the Preston Family Trust. He had never actually owned anything, except his own arrogance. I left the office at 6 p.m. for the first time as myself. Bianca Montague, CEO. 6 months later, I stood in the exact same ballroom at the Regency Hotel. The lighting was different, brighter, more professional. The banners were for the Regional Women in Business Conference. The irony was delicious. I was at the podium, but this time I had been invited. I was the keynote speaker, and I was here to accept the Businesswoman of the Year award. The woman who had been mocked as a failure in this very room was now being honored. Montague Fiduciary Equities had been transformed. I had cleaned house. After the audit, 4 more of Bruce's male executives were terminated for misconduct. Under the new leadership of Jessica, Melinda, and Clarissa, company profits had increased by 32% in just 2 quarters. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. We'd been featured in 3 major business journals as a model for progressive, effective corporate turnaround. More importantly, I had transformed. The woman who once hid her intelligence behind a demure smile now commanded boardrooms. The wife who had swallowed humiliation to protect her husband's ego now spoke her mind without apology. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking out at the audience of powerful, intelligent women. 6 months ago, I was in this very ballroom, and I was introduced to this community in a rather unconventional way. A ripple of knowing laughter went through the room. My story had become something of a legend. I was publicly mocked for being a decorative wife, dependent on my husband's success. Tonight, I want to share what I learned from that experience. In the front row, I spotted Jennifer Walsh, Melinda Sharp, and Clarissa Rivers. They were my executive team, and they were beaming. Their presence gave me strength. For 42 years, I said, I allowed others to define my worth. I pretended to be less capable than I was because I thought it would preserve my marriage and protect my husband's pride. What I didn't realize was that by diminishing myself, I was enabling a system that diminishes all women. The room was completely silent. The night I revealed I owned 73% of my company, I wasn't just correcting a misconception. I was reclaiming my voice after decades of voluntary silence. And what I discovered, ladies, is that silence is not golden, it's toxic. Applause rippled through the room. Some of you may be wondering what happened to my former husband and the executives who thought it was appropriate to mock a colleague's wife. More applause. This was the part they were waiting for. I am happy to report that accountability has consequences. Damian Harding, I said, the man who called me a failure, was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. He is currently serving a 3-year prison sentence. Martin Tate, I continued, the accountant who was complicit, is now thriving as our top financial analyst. He is, for the first time, doing honest work, and he is brilliant at it. He is a testament to the fact that talent can be redeemed, but only after it's been held accountable. Selena Chung, the assistant, is working as a temp at a law firm, making less than half her fraudulent salary. She is also, per our agreement, repaying the $87,000 she helped embezzle. It will take her approximately 10 years. I paused, saving the best for last. And Bruce Montague, my former husband, after his lawyers saw the trust documents and the prenuptial agreement he insisted on, he walked away with his pension fund and his golf clubs. He now works as a regional sales manager for a small textile company in Ohio. His annual salary is approximately 1/10 of what he earned when he thought he was running my company. The satisfaction in the room was a palpable, joyous thing. But tonight isn't about revenge, I said, my voice softening. It's about rebuilding. Montague Fiduciary Equities now has a female majority leadership team. We have implemented pay equity. We have promoted based on merit, and the results speak for themselves. I clicked to the next slide, showing the 32% profit increase. The most important lesson I want to share is this. It is never too late to stop hiding. For those of you who have been making yourselves smaller to accommodate the insecurities of others, your time is now. Stop apologizing for your excellence. The standing ovation was immediate. Later, as the evening wound down, I stepped onto the terrace, the same terrace I had avoided 6 months prior. The city lights sparkled. At 66 years old, I felt like my life was just beginning. A woman in her 50s approached me hesitantly. Mrs. Montague, I'm Patricia Williams. I own a small manufacturing company in the tri-state area. Your speech, it was extraordinary. I believe our companies could accomplish great things together. I have a proposal for a strategic partnership. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I took her business card. Patricia, I said, call my office tomorrow. Let's schedule a meeting. As I drove home to the house that had always been mine but finally felt like home, I thought about the unexpected gift Bruce's cruelty had given me. If he hadn't humiliated me so publicly, I might have continued the charade for another decade. The next morning, I woke in my own bed, in my own house, with my own company waiting for my leadership. I poured my coffee and opened my laptop to review the Q3 projections Jessica had prepared. My phone rang. It was Patricia Williams, ready to talk. I smiled and opened my calendar. At 66, I was just getting started. And Bruce, wherever he was, would read about every single success in the business journals. He would know, for the rest of his life, that the useless wife he'd discarded had built an empire, not without him, but in spite of him. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.